I just picked up a 71 C10. Redid a 67 C10 not long ago. Frame offed it and everything. Build was pretty easy. I really enjoyed it. It was one of my favorite ones so far. I don't think I really videotaped much of it kind of before I was making any videos, but I picked up the 71. It's already got a pretty cool drive line in it. I'll go over that later. Wanting to get this thing sitting right, I bought 8x20s in the rear, 8x20s in the front, 20x10s in the rear, so it's a staggered wheel, and it sat. There was just tons of gap. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and do an axle flip, and that'll get me about 5 inches in the rear. I'm doing 2-inch spring in the front with a 2.5-inch spindle, so it should put it right to about the top of the tread and tuck it in nice. I had a hell of a time finding a axle flip kit for the 71 or 72 with the leaf springs in the rear. You know, everything's got all the coil spring kits that are drop it however far you want. That was what my 67 had, so when I saw that this had leaves in the rear, I was like, hey, I love leaf springs, they work great. But I cannot figure out why nobody offers a axle flip for the leaf spring 71 72s. It's all 73 to 84 or something like that. Originally I thought that it was because these trucks still ran a 12 bolt, most of them. Maybe 73 they went to the 10 bolt. Sounds about right to me, not 100% sure. So I was thinking maybe axle tube diameter would not allow your new U-bolts to work, something simple as that. I did check, and the axle tube does fit snug around these that came with the 73 and up kit, so I'm not sure what exactly the difference is. The other main component is the saddle that the actual axle sits inside of. This sits on top of the spring after we're done. The axle will sit in this bracket. These ears go against the original perch to keep the axle from rocking in the saddle. And then you've got your lower plate that you bolt through. Unlike the original U-bolts go across the leaf spring. This new setup is going to be locking it down around the axle itself. So not sure exactly what we're going to run into, what differences there are. It could be something that the actual leaf mount doesn't support the bolts going through it. Let's find out. I figured for 45 bucks or whatever this kit was, very cheap, just an eBay seller, like YJ Performance or something like that. So I'm going to start pulling it apart. I'm going to do just one side first before I really commit to tearing the whole rear end out of it or whatever, doing both sides in case it doesn't work. And I'll just note it along the way. So I can't see how I'm not going to be able to make it work, even if it does take a little modification here and there. I mean, this is only maybe 1/4 inch steel, so I have a welder. We have the technology. But I'm going to pull this apart and just kind of see the pieces and see if they're even close. I don't know. Looks like it's pretty straightforward. Maybe they just mislabel them. Maybe it's just because of the body design difference. It's just a lot easier to say it's 73 and up, but it will work the old leaf spring. Since these are a little bit, not the common, I should say, the coil spring rear end is pretty dominant in these trucks. So let's get tearing apart and see what we find. One other thing we're going to be doing when you're going 5 inches or whatever in the rear, you're going to have to C-notch the frame. I don't really care about doing that kind of stuff because I'm not trying to keep it original. This truck's kind of rusty and I don't think I'm going to restore it. So even worst case, every truck out there that's low is probably C-notched. So you can pick up C-notch kits, pretty cheap. This one's just 1/4 inch steel. I want to say it was like 90 bucks or something like that. They're not that expensive. Get a decent brand, probably better fitment, whatever. The goal here is to just measure and measure and mark it up and measure, and then when you're done, take it apart and measure it again before you cut. There's a lot of videos on how to C-notch. It's not that difficult. Just take your time, sneak up on it, grind what you need to make this fit tight. If you're not fitting your frame tight in this channel, you're gonna have a hell of a time. There's gonna be problems. So get that tight, just as tight as you can. I'm going with the bolt end. There's a big debate on welding, bolting, blah, blah, blah. Find me an example of the bolts shearing and causing a problem. That's kind of where I ended up at with it. The bolt end seems to be pretty good. The one interesting thing that I did look into when I was actually trying to decide whether a weld in or a bolt in that I really didn't consider before was the heat of the welding. These old frames, they're not as thick as this new stuff. To get the temperature right to penetrate this, you're going to be probably getting the factory frame pretty hot. And you know what happens to metal when it gets really hot and cools down? It gets brittle. And I have seen examples of welded in C-notch kits cracking, not at the weld, but a little ways away from the weld in the original steel frame. Probably the best way to go is bolt in. That's just up to you. I've seen guys do a mixture of both, which I probably will end up doing. You know, inch weld here, there, whatever, especially on the inside. Crotch in this section, just to kind of keep everything from trying to settle it all. The only real trick is that I can think of, I'm leaving the bed on just because I don't feel like pulling it off by myself. It's kind of a pain in the butt. And I'm pretty confident that I got enough room. If for some reason I don't, which I can't see, but if not, I'll just pull it off. But I'm going to try it with the bed on. I'm going to do it before I put the flip on the axle, so I got more clearance here. The one thing you really want to do is secure the rear of the frame with a piece of steel or a 2x4, something. Mount it to the rear of the frame so when you do cut this section out, it doesn't try to sag on you. Then you're gonna get all sorts of problems. You know, this is leaf spring. That would be a bad idea. I am going to go ahead and take the rear shackle loose before I actually cut this section out, and then I'm going to brace up the rear of it. I'll kind of show you what I'm going to do there. I think I'm going to use a couple 2x4s since I don't have a piece of square. Actually, I might. Maybe I'll do a little both. But yeah, I'll show you the jig that I have just to keep it centered. I'm on a hoist. A lot of people do this on the ground, use jack stands or something. The hoist, what I'm going to do is actually just lower the truck down until it reaches the safety latches, so I know that the hydraulics won't settle at all. You do get some kind of seeping usually in your hydraulics if it sits for a day or two. So that's a nice little trick. Lower it down to stop blocks, you know the truck's not going to move. Support the rear of this thing, and then measure, measure, cut, measure. Measure again, cut. So it is metal, so if you do mess up, it's fixable, but you don't want to make mistakes on frames. So get a decent kit, measure a lot, support everything, make sure it's all stable before you do any cutting, and make damn sure that you're not cutting without looking behind the frame rail. Brake lines, fuel lines, that kind of stuff will get you in trouble real quick if you cut through them. So like I said, there's a bajillion C-notch videos out there. Pick one from Eastwood or whatever, whoever supplies them. CPP has a bunch of them. Not Eastwood, obviously, they're a paint company. Brothers has a couple good videos on it. So anyways, we're gonna get to it. I'm gonna put this in first. I'll show you a little video once I get ready and mark it all up and kind of show you what I'm doing, how I marked it real quick. Chop that out, we'll flip this thing over, and I'm fairly confident we're gonna have a $45 flip kit work on this 71 leaf spring. So we'll update you shortly. One thing I ended up noticing, I was taking that shackle bolt loose, and I figured I'd probably better just take the spring out just to see, make sure I don't have any hardware that's messed up. I'm going to be replacing the bushings. I'm going to use a Prothane kit or something like that to help try to keep the axle located, because it is going to be kind of tight against this inner well with the inner wheel well. I took a level, or a straight edge and a level, and went from the axle tube up to the frame just to kind of locate where the center of my notch should be. When I was kind of pulling the spring out, I thought it'd be a really good idea to mark that, and then I'm gonna just kind of loosely bolt everything together. What I did notice on the bottom of the new saddle is there's two different holes for your alignment. You can either move the axle forward or whatever. Just wanted to make sure that when I do put this back in, I'm not marking and notching the frame at the wrong position. I would assume that if you use the wrong setup, if you put it back too far, it might make your drive shaft short. So again, before I make any major decisions on cutting, I'm gonna go ahead and just mock this up both sides. Now, you can't really get enough suspension flex, because once you put the axle on top of the leaf, on one side, it puts the other side's leaf spring in a bind. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip that one over as well. Just lay everything in place, loosely bolt it together, and probably drop the truck down on some jack stands and see if I can't get it just as high up as I can. I don't think that the axle can really shift as the suspension compresses. The shackle does allow for flex in the back, but being anchored to the eyelet right in the front, I'm assuming that it's not gonna really move back and forth as it pivots. So that's just one thing I'm gonna double check quick. Probably just thinking about it too much, but again, when you're getting ready to cut a frame, you wanna think about it a lot. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the other side loosened up and everything. There are some very fun things you're going to deal with if you're in a rusty area. Luckily, we're down south and the bolts break loose and pretty much are free. This could be a whole lot of fun if you're up north or have a really, really salty, rusty truck. If you've ever had to deal with bolts being frozen in the sleeves of a bushing, not fun. I lived in Illinois for most of my life and I fought that on numerous vehicles, so this is kind of a treat. But if you are working with a pretty rusty truck, your front leaf spring perch, the nut's pretty much hidden and it's riveted on, so you'll be cutting all the rivets to pull that out if it's not breaking loose. Other than that, pretty straightforward so far. And I'll get the other side flipped and then I'll do a video actually of lowering it down to see how this thing travels, just to make sure that it's not going to be going one way or another. We got to compensate our marks on the notch, and then I'll realign everything with the straight edge as well, just to confirm that my positions didn't move on the frame. Then we can get ahead with cutting it in and doing the C notch. I'm leaving all the hardware loose at this point, just because I'm going to be putting the bushings in, probably taking it apart a couple times. So just everything's kind of sitting in place now. And just wanted to update you on that real quick, because I said that I was going to be doing the C notch before I did this flip. But the more I started looking at it, probably good to verify where we're actually notching it. Most of these kits come and they're supposed to line up with one of the factory rivets underneath the frame that you'll have to grind and cut off or air hammer off, whatever you do. But when I was kind of looking at this alignment hole, it looked like it set the rear end back probably 3/8 of an inch. So that was kind of making me concerned. Maybe the axle does swing a little bit. That's kind of why I'm going down this road. But I'm going to confirm it just for note's sake for the next person. A couple minutes shouldn't be a big deal. I got to loosen everything up anyways. So I'll get to it and we'll do a little experiment on axle travel on a leaf spring. So I did the exact same thing on the driver's side. And of course I jinxed myself, and then this little bolt was frozen in the sleeve, so that's been a good time. Finally got it out, dropped the spring out, and got a pretty good rig going. Ratchet strap around the axle tube is a very good idea. So now that we got it up, I'm gonna go ahead and stick my saddle underneath here. And I don't know exactly which hole to start with. I'm gonna start with the middle one, I suppose. Let's see how close that gets me. I did mark the frame up top. I got my music on, hold on a second. One thing I forgot to mention is double checking the saddle. As you can see, there is a little bit of gap here. And it is tight right at this top corner. I'm gonna go ahead and take a little bit off with the grinder on each side. As far as the width of the steel on the saddle of the original spring, it's dead on. So I'm guessing we just gotta open this up just a touch to make this sit flush at the bottom here. It's kind of in the shadow. But yeah, so far I think all we're gonna have to do is just grind down, I don't know, ½ inch to make this seat a little happier. And once this thing fits nice and snugger on the axle, then I'll go ahead and drop it down, U-bolt it. And I'm thinking that's gonna be the only modification we gotta do to these brackets so far. All right, folks, so I got the one side pinned in, driver's side, in the center location, like I was kind of guessing. So I moved over to the passenger side, got my saddle ground, and go to slide my axle forward to line up my dowel. And it looks like my drive shaft is bottomed out. It definitely is. So lifting it up obviously is shortening the drive shaft distance. And I'm guessing that's why they have that front hole on the bracket. Now, if that's the case, then absolutely moving it back, you know, an inch or whatever it is on the mount would affect your center line of the axle. So I'm incredibly happy I paused and went ahead and tried to install the axle up on top first to locate it. Let me try to adjust it to this front. Worst case, we're gonna have to get the drive shaft shortened, but I'm starting to think that's why they have that front hole on the saddle, is to account for pushing the axle back a little bit. Now, if that throws the center of the wheel off, then it's drive shaft shortening time no matter what. So let me move that other side quick. That's just the first major hitch that I've found so far, which could be really easy, or it could be ship drive shaft off time. So give me a few minutes here to move everything around and we'll follow up. Well, that was quick. I moved it to the front location and it did basically nothing. Sorry for being dark under here, but my drive shaft still bottomed out. So it is what it is. I mean, that is dramatic dropping it, so I should have probably kind of thought, I kind of had in the back of my mind wondering if the drive shaft is going to be long enough or too long, or actually too long, not long enough, but yeah, I'm going to pop that out, which will give me actually a pretty nice chance to make sure that I get my wheels and everything set to where I want, moving back and forth on the axle and see what looks right in the truck. I'll get the drive shaft out, snug everything up, and I'll set it down, and we'll double check to see where our axle tube measurements went. Well, that's on jack stands. It's not, of course, all the way down. I'm still waiting on ball joints for the front end. So that definitely gives you an idea. Not quite as low as I want it, but until I get the full weight of the truck down, I'm not going to really do anything different. I do have a adjustable rear shackle that drops it another inch to 2 inches, depends on which hole you put it in. As far as alignment goes, definitely want to go with the front hole. If you move it towards the center peg, then it's going to move you another inch towards the fender. I think that's about as squared in the wheel tub as you're going to get. So very exciting. Really thrilled with how this is coming out. Let me see if I can take a look over here quick. Yeah, that's way off. And I might actually lift this up and leave the camera in place and just watch what the axle does as I lower the truck down and see if it actually does pivot towards the rear or not. It does look like it shifted to me, but it could be just that I was looking at it quite a bit higher. So let me get the tripod set up quick and we'll do a little science experiment here. Should be pretty good. Just C-clamped a piece of steel, 1/2 inch away from the frame, and put a mark here, so let's keep an eye on that. I'm going to raise it up until the suspension's unloaded, and that'll give me a good idea of how far this thing is actually traveling. We can take some measurements from there to determine if it does compress more, how much it's going to move to the rear or front. So let me run the hoist here quick and we'll see what she does. Still within the frame of the camera. Okay, so it did move roughly 1/2 inch. Good to know. I guess as the spring flattens out, it does make sense if you're taking that arch away, and it would actually pivot towards the rear. I'm going to say that it's somewhere about, damn, it's close to 1/2 inch that it travels just from being freestanding. My suggestion and what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower it back down, and I'm going to mark my axle front and rear. That's going to give me where pretty darn close to ride height is going to be. I know this will be the rear of my axle, my front will be somewhere here, and then I'll fit my C-notch up to that, just to make darn sure that as the suspension goes up and down, the axle is going to move back and forth a little bit. So wasn't really planning on that, but that's what we're trying to figure out. So And since I'm already here, I'm just going to go ahead and lower the hoist back down and just watch it again, just for reference sake, so you can kind of see how this thing's moving. Just as the rear arms of the hoist came off the frame, so that should be fairly close to the ride height distance, and she lines right back up where she was. So definitely verified axle does travel front to back as the suspension flexes. Something to keep in mind. So yeah, as you can see, the damn C-notch is hard to hold up with one thumb, but that's where kind of I tentatively originally marked it, based off of that rivet location you can see, which you can tell is not even close, which I was kind of wondering because the bend of the C-notch didn't quite fit very well in the rear, where here it actually fits really nice, and you can see the two tall lines. I think that's gonna be money right where that's at. So, that's better on the thumb. If I would have originally put it in where I was guessing, I would have been hosed. I mean, we're talking like 2 inches back, probably 1.5 inches anyways. The arrows are the original axle location. Long lines are after I dropped it with just the flip kit. So as it compresses more, it's obviously going to sneak back farther. That's why it lines up fairly well at the front edge here, which this hole is actually tapered anyways, and has a little bit more give towards the rear of it, so if it does hit a bump, it can kind of go up without axle hitting anything. I think that's where she's gonna live. I'm gonna probably bolt together the front and then get it sitting on the ground just to confirm everything first, since it moves so much. I don't see having to change anything at this point, and I'm kind of curious to see with the axle flip just how much clearance I have between the stock frame horn, or the frame itself, and the axle. I thought it was gonna be a lot closer than that, to be honest with you. First thing I did this morning was measure up for Driveshaft. I did get the ball joints in and the front suspension done yesterday, set it on the ground, and it sits perfect, I think. When I showed you pictures of just the rear end on jack stands, it was probably 2 inches higher than when you put the full weight of the truck on the ground, so just keep that in mind. Didn't change a whole lot as far as the axle location, dropping just that little bit more. The top of the tread was pretty much tucked in the lip, so that's exactly where I wanted it. So the 5-inch flip is perfect. C-notch time, I did go ahead and mark it. I'll show you a little bit closer, and it looks like it's going to line up perfect. I'm going to cut, I already know that it's 1/4 inch steel. I marked the inside of the boot in here on the frame, and I know it's going to be too narrow, but I'm doing that intentionally, so that way I can really shave it down, fit it, shave it, fit it, to get it just to fit as tight as possible on the inside of the bracket. I'm not in a hurry to make anything happen there. The drive shaft I measured, I mentioned that earlier. It is just about a full inch long now that we dropped it. So just be prepared. If you don't have any local shop, I don't know anybody local, anybody within probably at least an hour, hour and a half of my house anyways. I send mine to Sadler Powertrain up in Davenport. Those dudes, they do awesome work. Huge facility, do big trucks, all kinds of stuff. I've been using them for 20-something years now, since probably 98. So definitely, if you don't have a local source, you need it done quick. I mean, it usually gets done the same day that it shows up. So awesome for those guys. Their prices are great. I think the last one I did, with a U-joint or two, I think it was like $130, $150 to cut it, balance it, and then U-joint it, whatever it needs to do. So as long as you have the yoke, that's the expensive part. But anyways, I'm gonna get to notching this thing. I'm gonna get it stable. I didn't really intend for this video to turn into a C-notch tutorial, but just I think a lot of people go into it and just kind of slap it up there and cut it in, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, my axle still hits on the outside, I wonder why that is. So hopefully it gives a little bit of information. I'm gonna try to wrap this up really quick, not do a lot more videos. I know it's already getting long. I try to keep everything under 20 minutes and we're already past it. So I'm gonna do just kind of a quick, like the cutting and stuff like that. I'm not gonna bore everybody with me cutting it and fitting it. And I hate videos like that anyway. So I pretty much don't do a lot of the mechanical work on film because as long as you kind of know what you're taking apart, that kind of stuff. Otherwise, it's just filler in my opinion. So anyways, I get to it. Try to keep this short. It's already going over, and I keep talking anyways. So about an hour and a half later, got my first notch kit in. Went pretty well. Took my time. Got it really tight on the inside. I'll try to get a little picture of that here shortly. Definitely takes a long time. Just do it right anyways. I ended up finding an old umbrella stand that I held on to and took the top out of my screw jack, cut it to length. So I had a good mechanical stop in the back and against the back of the frame. Lowered the hoist down onto the safety latches, like I said. Jacked it back here, put some good pressure on it. Cutting the bottom notches, I cut the top, then the sides, and then notched each one of those. A good way to tell if you've got it correctly supported or not is if it tries to pinch your blade. If it does, mine barely touched it, so I just ran the screw jack up like another quarter turn, half turn, and it was fine. So that's kind of a nice gauge. Be careful. You make sure you don't want to put too much pressure to bend the other way, but just don't try to sink a blade in real deep. You can get dangerous and break the blade. That's about the only tips I'd say there. I don't know if you can really see up in here at all, but we got her pretty damn tight up against everything. The best that I could anyways. Very happy with how it all came out. I think she's gonna be very strong. And yeah, that's pretty much that. Once I get everything done, I'll take a little picture of her sitting in her final location and we'll call this job a wrap.